So hello everyone. Today I'm going to present the work I've been doing on digital ink with this project SpaceInk, making space for in-context annotation. So this is a collaboration with Emmanuel, Nathalie, Ken and Caroline. So with digital ink, marking objects of interest often require a tight integration with the document content and can often be achieved within the whitespaces available in its vicinities. However, the addition of new content may require more substantial space than what is available with the current document layout. This can often result in awkward writing angles and it clutters the underlining content. So this degrades the experience of reading or rereading the annotation as well as the document content itself. But with pen and paper, annotations are just laid out on the canvas and on top of the document. Digital devices enable people to mark up documents in a way that may go beyond what is possible with physical pen and paper. So on digital devices, right now what we have is like we can make annotation with digital post-it notes to fill them and to indicate a comment or a revision to do, or to create comment that will appear in a dedicated sidebar on the side. So it's a tedious process as people need to open a menu, then create a note, and finally annotate it. So this interaction with the interface impacts the active reading process as they interfere with the capture of fleeting thoughts, driving many people to rely instead of pen and paper. So in this project, let me tell you what we call in-context annotation. In-context annotation tend to be close to the content that elicited them. They usually take form of handwritten footnotes, marginalia, sketches, and tend to be as close as possible as the content. Unfortunately, users always have to compose with the often limited spaces when commenting or annotating sentence, words, or paragraphs. So previous work, such as texturing, have investigated how to embed such annotation in a document to relax the physical constraints of paginated documents. They have investigated either to make space between lines or to make space in the margin using pen+touch techniques. However, digital documents are not necessarily paginated for printing on a standard size paper, and they are often designed to support different rendering contexts, for instance, adapting the layout to different devices or screen orientations. So we can be much more flexible than just annotating between lines or in the margin. We can, for example, annotate a side of paragraph to indicate a revision about the whole paragraph, or we can also annotate between words to indicate a simple correction, or even annotate wrapped in paragraph to indicate that a picture should be inserted. So the goal of our paper here is to understand and explore the design for creating such in-context annotations. So we introduce SpaceInk. So SpaceInk is a design space of pen-touch input technique that make room for annotations. So we first distinguish two ways to make room for annotation, either touch-based or pen-based. So either touch creates space with a pinch gesture or other gesture, and pen-based creates space for annotation. So we can also observe different timestamps at when space is created for annotation. So it can be created before annotation has been done, while annotation is done, or after the annotation is done. So, because we work also in reflowable documents, we can also add the dimension where additional space is created. So it can be on the side of paragraph, between lines, wrapped in paragraph, or between words. So we have here 25 different ways to make space for annotation. So I'm just going to show you a small subset of examples with those 6 examples where we focus on the between words location depending on the when dimension. So I'm just going to go through all of them. So let's see the before technique when touch creates space. So user makes space before the annotation and they should anticipate the length of their annotation to have enough space to write. So it's kind of a premature commitment. So the before technique when pen creates space between words. So as a before technique, user over a specific position in the text to make space in it. So note that this space is fixed, forcing user to write and adapt his annotation into the box. So I'm just setting aside the while touch base that it requires user to write and pitch at the same time, which some people in our studies found really uncomfortable and during pilot testing. So I'm moving to the while technique when pen creates space. So in this while condition, the content moves at the same time as user write, allowing to see in real time the document reflowing. So I'm going to switch to the after technique when touch creates space between words. So users first begin by inking on top of the text. Then they move the paragraph after having inked, so they could arrange the layout depending on the length of the annotation. So finally, the after technique when pen creates space between words. So the last technique allows users to freely write and after tap their annotation to let the system decide where the annotation should go. So to explore this design space and understand where users would like to embed their annotation depending on the different technique in the document, we conducted a study. So the study was fairly simple. Participants have to write the sentence in blue at the top next to the scope in blue. So we asked them to minimize the space between their annotation and the scope highlighted in blue. So the study was split in blocks corresponding to our different techniques. So to introduce the following two factors, we introduce the following two factors to operationalize different contexts in which annotations are made, length and scope. So what is annotation length? It could be short, long, or expanding. So the length corresponds to how many words a sentence can contain. So short for short sentences, long for long sentences, and the expanding condition expand words as long as you write, and user has no cues on how many words the sentence can contain. It's the same thing when people annotate on the fly and you don't know what you will write and when you are thinking about something. And finally, the annotation scope, so it can be is where an annotation should be placed, either next to a small subset of sentences in a paragraph or more next to a paragraph. So either inline or block. So to quickly sum up the experiment design, user experience, so two sets of techniques, so either pen-based or touch-based, 3 different time stops of when space is created, so while, before, or after, 3 lengths of annotation, short, long, or expanding, and 2 annotation scopes, inline or blocks. So this gave us 36 trials minus the one we discarded during the uncomfortableness, which gives us 30 trials per participant. So we conducted this study on a Surface book with 12 participants that we got for an hour, and the experiment our 20 conditions. So to quickly go through the result we get, here is the overall percentage of use of our technique. In Y, you have the percentage, and in X, you have the length of each bar represents its use in the study that you could find in the legend on the top. So overall, participants mostly wrapped their annotation in paragraphs or inserted them between lines. So strategies that consist of annotating between words or on the side of paragraph in blue or in light blue were used less frequently. But if we compare the two scope conditions, so block or inline, we can see a clear inversion in the distribution of between side of paragraph in light green and between word strategy in dark blue. So for the third graph, this reveals that participants tend to embed annotation between words in dark blue when they are short, but not when they are expanding or long. And for the final graph, we can observe that the technique itself do not seem to influence the choice of strategy, either pen or touch. It does not seem to make a huge difference. But what we observe in the study is that people use a full range of strategies that are specific to each of them. So during the study, we have also observed that participants were often unable to estimate the length of their annotation, and they ended up annotating on the text and for all techniques, either pen-based, touch-based, or before, while, or after. And surprisingly, this happened even with short sentences. So participants also really like both technique pen-based while, so that expand the space as long as you write, and pen base after when you tap the ink. So they really enjoy having to perform not just any gesture, to not perform any gesture, and they also like mostly that the system is taking care of everything and they don't have to think about anything. And at the end of the experiment, participants commented that they would like to rely mostly on the pen input instead of doing any gesture. So now we did our experiment, but one question remains, which is how to support both in-context annotation that are embedded in the text and move the document layout, and overlaid annotation, which are on top of the document, such as highlighting, circling, or underlining, and that you don't want to move the document contents. So during active reading, people often switch between both types of annotation, either to, as you see, circle some words to highlight some portion of document, or to make annotation to explicitly anchor their thought using in-context annotation. But letting user making both those type of annotation is really important and essential. So to transition between both, we opted for a prefix flick gesture. So by default, the pen overlay inks on top of the document without changing the layout. But when performing a flick gesture, the pen turns into an in-context annotation tool. So this gesture is particularly interesting and elegant, as it allows the user quickly specify the space-making strategy while switching mode. So the space-making strategy is inferred from the relative position from the initial point of contact and the direction of the flick gesture. So as you could see here, I can do an horizontal flick gesture, vertical one, or diagonal flick gesture. So based on our study observation and result we design this prototype. So here we try to rely as far as possible on the pen input only, as all actions are performed with the pen. As you can see here, to integrate both annotation in a coherent manner, annotations are preserving their position relative to the content, and overlay ink marks remain spatially aligned with their scopes. We also enable users to easily switch between different space-making strategies using our flick gestures. We also integrate a button that can also be triggered to enable in-context annotations. And we mostly rely on the while condition when the space is expanded as long as user write. So selecting an annotation activated, enabling user to adjust the underlining white spacing using a pin gesture or manipulating the handles of each resizing box. And at any moment, user can grab an existing in-context annotation with a finger and move it. And the associated space-making strategy gets automatically updated based on the finger location. So also users should be able to easily come back to the original document layout with any in-context annotation. So with a free finger swipe, in-context annotation are sent in the margin to avoid cluttering the document content. And with the same swipe gesture, in-context annotation are sent back in the document content. So however, there is a few limitations to this work. One limitation of our approach lies in the technique for positioning annotation relative to the document content. It assumes that this content does not change. However, when working, for example, with web pages, for example, content might change and the anchor to which annotation has been attached might disappear or might be removed. Also, when performing active reading on paper, people sometimes use annotation to build a spatial representation of the document. And if reading the document in a non-linear way, in-context annotation might interfere with this frontal process as they completely move the document layout. As you could see in the example I show you first, in-context annotation have moved the position of the sentences and words in the document. So to conclude this talk, we demonstrate here a design space and a system that lets users concentrate on capturing fleeting thoughts, streamlining the overall process by making room for annotation. And we also demonstrate how to effectively interweave between both types of annotation, in-context annotation and overlaid annotation. So we put all additional information on the website, and where you can see all techniques that we use in our experiment and additional results and plots. Thank you very much. I'm ready to take some questions.
Questions?
Oh, no.
Shumin Jai. I really want this, so what it takes to get it in Overleaf or some sort of PDF reader, what are the challenges to actually put such things in practice? Is it the interaction design side, or is it engineering that's the bottleneck to realize something like that? The other question is, so you seem to only focus on touch input. Would desktop mouse cursor based not a problem, not relevant to this space, or?
No, usually when people annotate document or doing digital annotation, they usually do not use a mouse and keyboard. I mean, it comes up with sharp sentences. I mean, so that's why we focus mostly on the pen and touch devices. But to answer more specifically your question, when you were asking about challenges, what we experience with our studies, like people enjoy really having to rely on a lot of space making strategies. For example, someone liked making space between words with the touch gesture. Somebody else would like to do the pen after gesture on the paragraph. So what we saw is that the challenge is to enable all those type of making space of annotation inside the same tool. So that was our challenges in this project, and I think it's the same challenges to make such a tool.
Michelle?
Hi, I'm Michelle Annett from Mishmash Makers. So I do copy editing, tons of copy editing for people. So when I make annotations, I'm not just writing 2 or 3 words. I'm writing like 6 sentences to explain how a concept somebody may have written in the document is not correct. They need to reference something else, and this is why they need to reference it, blah, blah, blah. So you mentioned that people have a difficult time determining the space that they need to actually write the annotation in. So I'm wondering if you have any ideas or suggestions on how maybe we can dynamically create space for people so that they actually have the amount of room they need, especially when they may not know, 3 words versus 6 sentences is a very different amount of space that you could need.
So yeah, that's true. That's what we observe in the touch before technique, that people often were unable to estimate the space for the annotation. So that's why we created the while touch techniques that make space as long as you write. So I'm not sure I get your question, but I mean, we designed the while techniques to make space as long as user writes. So if you write a text of 1,000 words, it's just expand text as long as you write. So. Yeah, basically you just mess up the whole document layout, but you have space to write. So, we have to find like kind of a trade-off between moving the document content and making space for annotations.
Okay, thank you very much, Hugo.